Hi, everybody. I'm Brooke Silva Braga. Thanks for spending some of your Friday night with us. We're wall-to-wall on Tropical Storm Florence, which has now moved into South Carolina. Both South and North Carolina are facing powerful winds. What's being described as potentially catastrophic flooding. Life-threatening storm surges are expected to continue throughout the night tonight. 4 counties in North Carolina are already facing flash flood emergencies. At least 5 people have died and hundreds have been rescued. At a news conference earlier this evening, North Carolina's governor warned residents there to be prepared for several days of rain and wind. We've been covering it all night. We will into the early morning hours. And David Parkinson, our weather producer, joins us now for what is a new updated forecast, David?
Right, a new updated forecast from the National Hurricane Center and another urgent bulletin from the National Weather Service in Moorhead, which is right on the coast there. So I'll start with that flash flood emergency. We had until 9 a.m. tomorrow, and that was in effect for Craven County. That was also in effect for Caldwell County.
The map's bigger now.
Right, the map is now bigger. So we have now expanded that map. So it was Jones, Craven, Carteret, and Pamlico. We have now added Jones, Lenoir, Onslow, and Duplin. So those 4 counties are until 4:30 in the morning with an additional 5 to 10 inches of rain expected. So that now includes Jacksonville. That's brought us west. We're nearing the interstate. We're nearing Wilmington. And I think there will be a certain point, whether it's tonight or tomorrow, where Wilmington gets itself into a flash flood emergency. But it is that heavy band of rain that will continue to move just a little bit to the south and west as the storm does so as well. So it had been parked over those counties where it had been issued before. It is now slowly moving, and that's where we are starting to see the next big flood threat.
A quick question on the flooding, though. I saw our Jeff Glore getting pelted by rain some, 16 hours ago in Wilmington. Why the warning now?
Right. So the warning now is because the most intense bands that we've seen all storm are finally making their way through some areas. So though the center of the storm is some 100 miles away from this particular band, it's a long tropical moisture fetch over the ocean. You can see it right there, all of that red on the radar. So here's the interesting thing to note.
So is you're saying it's worse now when then Jeff could barely get on the air this morning and was getting knocked over by the rain?
Correct, because the rain is worse now even though the wind isn't.
Okay.
So here's the thing that's interesting as we've been watching this radar over the last 3 hours. You see that band that's right over Wilmington, right? That band had been producing rain at 1 to 2 inches per hour. That's now getting to a 3-inch per hour band. But it's this big outer band there that you see by the Kinston label down headed towards the coast. That's the one that's triggered that flash flood emergency, and that's the one that we're most concerned about. Had been parked over New Bern, where they had some flooding and some rescues already.
Yeah.
Jacksonville, again, is another place where the storm surge is going to be increasing over the next hour as we get to another high tide cycle. So these are places that are having a combined threat from both storm surge and then also this freshwater flooding. And that band, you can see, it just is unrelenting for hours and hours.
You talk about the high tide. We're about an hour away from that, but if you spend any time boating with tide charts, you know that the greatest amount of flow in the tide going from low to high is in those middle hours, kind of the hour we just had.
Right.
Do we have any type of way to know what's going on the ground? I know it's dark as anything out there.
Right. Well, so the interesting thing is it's the math in this one, right? So the force is strongest in those hours leading up to the slack tide point, right? But it's the amount of water level, right? So if let's say we have a 6-foot storm surge in some places, when you combine that with a 4-foot high tide, the water is now 10 feet sort of above that baseline, and that's the water that's pushing in. So we need all of that additional high tide to reach as far as it can reach, and that's why we're most concerned at that high tide point. Right. But we're seeing the gauges again continuing to rise. What was interesting was in Wilmington today, the highest point that the water reached was an hour after high tide because the surge was so strong it actually overpowered the tide going down. But this is what we're talking about in terms of rain totals here. 3 inches per hour in that band by Wilmington, but 5 to 6 inches per hour, according to our Doppler radar, in that line that is just about to make its way into Jacksonville. Once we take a look at the 3-hour totals, we're looking at 3-hour totals on the range of a foot. So a foot of rain in about 2 hours, even if, let's say, the Doppler indicated totals are off by about 10% because they're an estimate and they have an algorithm, and let's say it's a little bit off, we're still talking about 10 inches of rain in 2 hours. That is enough to cause life-threatening flooding. And if there aren't water rescues that are taking place now, they're more than likely going to have to take place in the next couple of hours.
And do those numbers pass the common sense test? Like, rain really falls that fast in a storm like this?
In a truly tropical environment, it is so rare to get a band of moisture that is that rich that it can produce rain at those rates. And usually, you've got a summer thunderstorm where you'll get rain at 6 inches per hour, but it doesn't actually last for a whole hour. It usually moves pretty quickly, but because this band has just sort of been in a continuous line, it's almost like a train track, right? Even though it's actually circulating around, you're seeing a continual movement of moisture over that same area. So yeah, it is entirely possible, and in fact likely, that some of these rain totals are indeed what we're looking at. So we're really concerned about that, and will continue to be. But the interesting thing, we started the hour with that National Hurricane Center advisory.
We talked about the floods.
Right.
However, we didn't get to the other part.
So what people are going to be fooled by is it continues to lose strength in the wind speed. So the wind speed right now is down to 65 miles an hour. That's considerably less than it had been. The forward motion's a little faster now. We're at 5 miles an hour, and we're 15 miles west-northwest of Myrtle Beach. But just because the winds have decreased does not mean that the moisture, which you can see the cloud tops on the satellite here, and you can see, just look at how red, and the redness there is an indication of how much moisture is loaded in there, and that's all still moving on shore. So when we talk about the track of the storm continuing to move to the west-southwest, it's going to move closer to Wilmington, and the Wilmington flood threat is probably tomorrow. So it's from Wilmington down to the North Carolina-South Carolina border that we're most worried about in the morning.
We talked earlier in the week about this being a wind event, a rain event, a storm surge event. With the winds now down at 65, are we not really worried about the wind so much, and it's the other categories?
Yeah, I mean, so you've got some things that are fatigued. You've got root systems that are very fatigued because they've been dealing with this much rain and this much wind for a constant period of time, and the ground's saturated, so it's already weakened. So the wind isn't helping things, but as you can see, the wind's steadily decreasing. By the time we get to tomorrow evening, the National Hurricane Center has been fantastic on the track. They've nailed this one from 5 days out. They forecasted the landfall within 2 miles of where it actually hit.
Really?
Which is incredible. They've been a little too strong in the intensity, so that 40-mile-an-hour reading at 8 p.m. Saturday, where it's still a tropical storm, I don't know we're going to get there. We might get to 8 p.m. and find it's a tropical depression, but still, the tropical depression is going to have all that moisture that it's still tapping into on the right-hand side, and that's why we're looking at that flood threat as it moves into the interior Carolinas, and that's why we're worried about Fayetteville and Charlotte as you move into your Sunday.
You mentioned the storm going west-southwest. I'm not familiar with hurricanes ever going southerly once they make landfall in a place like this. Is this uncommon? I know it's still going to track north, but it just seems unusual.
It certainly is. You're not supposed to gain latitude. I'm sorry, you're not supposed to lose latitude as a tropical system once you've made landfall. But what is making this storm so slow is also what's making it move in such an erratic direction. So what's happened is you've got a Bermuda high, which is fairly typical this time of year, and you've got that combined with a high over the Great Lakes. So there's no place for it to go north. It's pushing it south. So until it can get something to kick it out of there and start moving, it has to follow the steering currents, and the steering currents, strangely enough, are pushing it south. And that is why we've got such a big concern for some of this, because we're now on the dirty side, the front right quadrant of the storm that's pushing all the moisture and some tornadoes onto the right side of the storm there, and that's what we're looking at for the next several hours. But look at that radar. That's 4 p.m. tomorrow, and you can see one of those heavy bands set up right over Wilmington.
Yeah, basically the whole state of North Carolina. You mentioned tornadoes. Our colleagues at WNCN have been doing a great job. We've been dipping in and out of their coverage, and it seems like every time we dip in, there's another tornado warning.
Yeah, and there's some that they just keep extending them. So that's the interesting thing, is they're moving so quickly. The storms are moving at 50 miles an hour that they just blow through their warning into the next area. But you're seeing the wind there, and so all that you need is for that wind to come down with a little bit of rotation on the ground. The tornadoes don't last very long, but still a 90-mile-an-hour tornado is enough to cause damage and enough to make things in a bad situation even worse.
Do we know if any have touched down, and how concerned are we about future ones?
So we're not currently getting any reports, but there are two complications. One, it's night out. Two, hopefully people aren't out going and chasing these things. But three, the National Weather Service in Morehead City, their phones are out. They're having communication problems because of where they're located in Morehead City, where some of the worst weather has been. So we're going to get more of information on that. We're getting more information on rain totals so far. We've only got a couple of them because some of the gauges have gone bad. Some people aren't able to report things. So we'll know actually a lot more about the totality of this storm on Monday. But every indication is the amount of rain that we've gotten thus far, we could double it in some spots. Anywhere where you see the black in this is the newest weather model right here. That's another 15 inches of rain over the next 2 days into Monday morning.
You're saying double from where we are now?
Correct, yes.
We'll only have half our rain.
Yeah, that is very much possible. There are certain spots where the worst of the rain is behind you, and that's from Morehead City on north up to the Virginia border. But as we get closer to the North Carolina-South Carolina border, it is very likely that you have not even reached your halfway point.
Okay. David Parkinson, thanks so much. We'll get another update. You're sticking with us 1 more hour?
That's right. We'll be here at midnight and see a look at some of the rivers that we expect to be flooding over the next couple of days. We'll take a look at that.
Okay. David, thanks so much.
Sure thing.